great to be back. Thanks for the book. Thank you. What an honor to be here today. Thank you. Well, first off, I want to thank your great chair. We have been around the state the last 2 days, but before that I got a chance to really sit down with Jennifer Horn and get to know her and know her love for this party and more importantly for the state and this country. We were out at the Republican National Committee meeting earlier in the year, and Reince Priebus, the RNC chair, actually grew up about 15 miles down the road from me to the one direction. Ironically, Paul Ryan grew up about 15 miles down the road from me the other direction. Must have been something in the water in the 80s. Although actually, funny story about Paul, you get a kick out of this. Paul and I both flipped hamburgers as kids at McDonald's. My first job was washing dishes, and then I moved up to flipping hamburgers at McDonald's. The only difference was I was in Dellum in a small town, he was in Janesville. Honest to God truth, Paul's manager told him he had to flip hamburgers in the back because he didn't have the interpersonal skills to work the front cash register. So you'll see him kidding about that. It's a true story. But I think about being here in this state and being joined today. My wife, Tonette, First Lady of Wisconsin, is with us as well today. We've got two sons, Matt and Alex. They're 20 and 19. They're both in college. They're both active, actually, amazingly, in college Republicans. In fact, Matthew was just a statewide chair, and he knows you're statewide chair here as well. And so we're thrilled as we go around the country when we see, it's kind of fun to see people who know your kids, not just yourself. So we're real proud of Matt and Alex, and they're probably going to make a point. They twisted our arms to figure out a way to maybe take part of a semester off next year and next fall and come to New Hampshire and come around the country and talk to young people like themselves. Because they're real proud of the fact that in our state, in the last election, when I was the #1 target in the country, at least one of the network exit polls showed that amongst 18 to 24-year-olds, we went 49 to 48%. So how about that? We got the message out. And I want to tell you how much I appreciate all of you, not just being here today, but many of you, as I look around this room, helped us out over the last couple of years. People forget this, but back in 2010, I was target #1 at that point in the recall election, and so many people across this country reached out here in New Hampshire and elsewhere and made a $20 or $25 donation, or a lot of people actually literally at home reached out and went online and made phone calls for us. Most importantly for Tonette and I, a lot of people said they prayed for us, and I got to tell you, in the height of all those protests and the recall, for us and our family, even with 100,000 protesters, even with the death threats and all the other nonsense, the folks who reached out and lent their support like that meant the world to us. So thank you to all of you here who did that along the way. Back 4 years ago, when we had all the protesters, I remember Time Magazine had a headline that said "Dead Man Walking." They didn't think I was going to get past the recall, let alone be reelected. And we knew that our reforms would work. We just needed enough time to prove it. In fact, I remember our polls were so bad about this point in the spring of 2011 that they thought, there was no way we could win. And yet, two things happened. By that fall, when our kids and all the other kids who went to public schools went back to school, the schools that had used our reforms found that their schools were the same or better. And then in December, when property tax bills came out, and after a dozen years of property taxes going way up, property taxes in our state actually went down. But I'm proud to say today, in my state, property taxes are lower today than they were 4 years ago when I started. How about that for a turnaround? And we knew that would make a difference. And sure enough, when people saw, they didn't have to see the TV ads that were attacking us starting in March of 2011. They didn't have to believe all the protesters that came in from around the country. When they could see for themselves that the reforms were working, the tide started to change. And by June of 2012, we won that election. In June of that year, with a higher percentage of the vote, with more actual votes cast than we had in November of 2010, 2 years earlier. That shows the results matter, right? The reason I tell you that is not just for background. The reason I tell you that is because if I look at America today, I have a lot of the same worries that Tonette and I had when we first thought about running for governor. Many years ago, in 2009, we sat down and talked about, we thought about, we ultimately prayed about getting in the race for governor. And we knew it would be tough, because in our state, we haven't carried the state for Republicans since 1984. When I was in high school and I still had a full head of hair, so it's a long time ago. But when I think back to that, it was back to those days, early in 2009, we knew it would be tough in our state to run and win. But we knew we had to, because we were worried for our sons who were then in high school that they were going to grow up in a state, well, that wasn't as great as the state we grew up in. And I got to tell you, as a parent, that's just unacceptable. And so we got in that election, we won that battle. I got to tell you, it was all the better, because when we faced all the grief that we did 4 years ago at this time, it was worth it, because if it had just been about a title or a position, we might have backed down. But because we knew it was about our sons, Matt and Alex, and all the other sons and daughters like them and those yet to be born, we knew it was worth standing up and fighting for. We knew that even though those groups, it's like the book that was held up here a moment ago, the title of that book is called Unintimidated, because we knew the tactics they were using in our state are like the tactics they use around the country. They seek to intimidate. Instead of intimidating us, it reminded us exactly who elected us and the job they elected us to do. And from that point forward, we never lost focus of what we were intended to do, and that's what we need more of in America today. You see, today, as much as I'm proud, as Jennifer talked about, of the changes, the transformational changes we made in our state, I'm proud of the fact that for my sons and their generation, I can say today that not only is the state better than it was 4 years before, it's as good or better than it was when I was growing up. And that was my goal, because I wanted my kids to grow up in a better place than we did. But I got to tell you, again, as a parent today, I'm worried. I'm worried for our country. I'm worried about my sons and your sons and daughters, my nieces and your nieces and nephews and grandsons and granddaughters. I'm worried that we're headed down that same path that we were 2 years ago in my own state. But I'm an optimist. So I'm not just worried, I have optimism that if we can put the kind of leadership in place in this country that we have done in my state and many of my neighboring states, where common sense leaders stood up 4 years ago and said, we're going to change things, we're going to make them better, we're going to lead in a way that's common sense, Republican, conservative principles, we're going to enact those in a way that make our states better, and we have. I believe we can do the same thing in America. Let me give you 3 examples. When I look at this country, I think there's a clear contrast out there, particularly when it comes to growth. You listen to the President of the United States, particularly when he gave his State of the Union address, and he talked a lot. I tried to listen to him to see, you know, as an American first, I hope for the best. But I hear a president, and I hear many of his allies, like Hillary Clinton and others out there, who I think believe that you grow the economy in Washington. You think about last year, there was a report that showed that 6 of the top 10 wealthiest counties in America aren't in New York, or California, or Florida, or Texas. You know where they're at? In and around Washington. In and around Washington. That says to me, they think you grow the economy of Washington. I believe in America, we believe, the vast majority of the rest of us, from outside of Washington, which, by the way, I call 68 square miles surrounded by reality. That's what Washington is. The rest of us who live in reality understand we grow the economy in cities and towns and villages all across this great country, that people create jobs, not the government. It's about time we have leaders that will help the people of this country grow